gentlemen, you are listening to the Fighting Families podcast with Preston Cave. We are in a spiritual battle, and we have a real enemy. That enemy is not our family. It's the goal of this podcast to help you fight for the family. And now, welcome your host, the Mission and Discipleship Coordinator for TBM, Preston Cave.
Well, welcome to this week's episode of the Fighting Family Podcast. My name is Preston Cave, and I'll be your host. I just want to encourage you, as I always do, if you have yet to watch episode number 1 called How to Become a Fighting Family, I highly encourage you to go back, watch that so that you can get a general idea and understanding of what we are all about here at Fighting Families and about this Fighting Family Podcast. Each week we talk about a different topic about what it means, the blessings or the curses or the challenges of being a family, and especially a Christian family. And so we always want to bring in a special guest to come in and talk about different topics. We've had this guest in before. His name is Jason Richards. He is the director of Super Summer Evangelism Training Camps for Texas Baptist. And in a previous episode, we had him talk about how to become a gospel-centered family. And it was such a great episode. I highly encourage you to go and watch that. We're going to invite him back on to talk specifically to us as parents. How do we apply the gospel to ourselves? And, we as parents struggle with knowing whether or not we're doing it correctly. So we're going to have him come on and talk to us a little bit about that. So let's go ahead and invite Jason Richards back to the show. We're going to have him come back on. And just a quick reminder, you will see people walking in the background. So it's okay. This is a very chill and calm episode, as every episode is. But hey, Jason, welcome back to our show. We're so glad that you have chosen to be with us again.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a long time. As you can tell, we're in the same clothes as we were in the previous episode. So that tells you a little something, tells our listeners something. But Jason, real quick, how about you just spend a quick moment and just recap what we talked about in our previous episode, how to become a gospel-centered family.
So we talked about what the gospel is, that God sent his son down to earth and to be with us, and he's trying to rebuild a relationship with us that we broke. And so you like to use the words that the perfect life, perfect death, the burial, and the resurrection. I think those are great words to describe it. But that's the gospel. Then we talked about the difference between evangelism and discipleship is basically who gets that gospel. When you apply it to a person that has not received that gospel and hasn't believed, then it's called evangelism. And when you apply that same good news, that gospel, to someone who does believe and has received it, then it's called discipleship. And that, it doesn't stop with the lost, and it keeps on encouraging, and it keeps on building a relationship with God for those who are saved or who have heard it and have accepted it. And then we talked for a moment about the learning pyramid and how if we're going to teach our children, our households, what it means to live out the faith in Jesus, then we might want to take some cues from the education world and understand which ways are effective to do that. So there's a little chart there. And we talked about how it's really a flipped chart, that we use the ones that are least effective and we rarely use the ones that are most effective. That's kind of a recap. Maybe I missed something.
No, that was good. And I love what you said. You were talking about the church and the church's role in teaching the gospel to our kiddos. One of the things you said is, if I were Satan, you didn't say it verbatim, but basically the concept is, if I were Satan and I'm trying to figure out ways to make the church least effective, I'm going to get the church to teach in the least effective way, and parents as well. So that was really good.
So this is a parenting podcast. Well, Fighting Families podcast.
Yeah.
I have to show you what I just got under the door.
Oh, well, I'm excited. Did you get an Amazon package?
It says lunch. Are you ready? Yes. No.
That's awesome. You got a check yes or no note from your family?
Yeah, this is from my boy. So I'm gonna put no. Not yet.
Slide it back under the.
About 20 minutes. All right. So
which is the average commute for the average American. 26.1 minutes is the average commute to go to work. And so we're trying to keep these episodes under that as much as possible. Not guaranteed that it's going to happen every time. But
Right.
the purpose is so that you can listen to this episode or watch this episode on your way to work. So that's exciting.
I have to say, I'm excited that we were able to have that experience instead of the one where the guy has like the baby and the wife crawling on the floor.
Yes,
Okay.
I've seen that. That's hilarious.
Yeah. Okay. So what's up? What are we doing today?
Well, so we want to talk a little bit about what it means to be a gospel-centered parent, or to parent in a gospel-centered way. But also, really, the main challenge is, I know for me, and I'm sure for you as well, we've made a lot of parenting mistakes over the years. And so, how do we become a parent that actually applies the gospel to ourselves? And what does it even mean to apply the gospel to yourself?
Yeah, that was what felt left unsaid from the previous episode. So, I wrote a few notes. I think that the key is just to have grace for mistakes. And there's a lot of humans in this world, a lot of humans in our household, and all humans are making mistakes, right? And so I think we have to apply that grace to ourselves. We've never taught, or we've never experienced each parenting moment that we're in before. Every human is different, so it doesn't matter if you have 17 kids. Your experience with each one is different, and so they're all at different phases. You're at different phases. The world is at different climates and changing cultures and all kinds of things. And so I just think it's very easy for us to have all these expectations that, we ought to have it down by now, or really, really poor expectations of like, this is my job. I'm a teacher. I should know how to do this. Or I'm a counselor. I should know how to do this. No, you're human. You're broken, just like the person you're talking to and the person you're listening to, So I just think grace for mistakes is something we've got to apply to ourselves. And then I think same thing goes for our kids. We've just got to apply that grace to our kids often, and use it as teaching moments to let them know the design of God's design for family is to have parents over children, and that part of what parents are supposed to be doing is portraying the relationship God has with his children. And part of that is definitely going to include giving grace. So I haven't hit the mark yet. I think it's coming one day, but my son's 9, and before he was born, I've dreamt of the day when he gets himself into some really bad trouble, and I give him full grace, 100%.
You're dreaming about this.
Yeah, I want that day to get here because I've experienced that, and I know that there's an opportunity for it to be a powerful moment that changes his walk with the Lord. But that day is on reserve. It hasn't come just yet. So we've given him plenty of grace, but he hasn't had really, really stupid choices yet. So anyway, I mean, that's a teaching moment in itself, I think we should do. And then I think the last place I wanted to make sure I mentioned is grace for mistakes for your spouse. They're experiencing their very first time in that moment as well, with that child in this culture, in whatever the experience is, in whatever level of maturity they have. And they're not you. So you have to let them be themselves, just like you want to be able to be yourself when you're parenting. And so you come together and you partner up and you work that problem that's facing you, and you do it in a kind way and give grace. So that's at least what I try to do in my family. So.
Well, and that goes hand in hand with what the Fighting Families podcast is all about. Again, if you haven't watched the first episode of Fighting Families, you need to go and watch How to Become a Fighting Family, because we talk a little bit about that. The idea is we oftentimes look at our family members because of something that they've done to us. We look at them as if they are the enemy. And in the reality, we do have a spiritual enemy, but it's not our family. It's Satan. And Satan is all about trying to disrupt, the two institutions that God established for discipleship and evangelism in the world is the family first, and then the church second. And those are the two institutions that Satan is trying to attack or redefine the most. So we do have an enemy, but it's not our family. So instead of us fighting with our family, we need to be fighting for our family. And I think you just nailed it on the head right there.
Okay, so on that point you just said, that's something else I wanted to communicate is that we have to remember that we are part of God's design, part of his first institution ahead of the church,
Yeah.
is that we would be the ones who are teaching our children the way
Mm.
of Jesus, and how to follow him and how to live in relationship with him. And that's part of his design. And I think one thing that's really encouraging is that, if that's God's design and he's the one who controls when children are made and when they're not and where they come from, whether it's an adoption or biological or whatever the case may be, right? That God is orchestrating those things and designing those families, and he's put us as parents and you, the listener, as parents over those children. And there is nobody better suited to parent that child. And it feels like there's got to be other people who are better sometimes,
Yeah.
but there isn't. Nobody knows them the same way. Nobody cares for them the same way. The reason we get so upset is because we care and we love that child. We want to see them grow and do well and honor God with their lives. And they're human and they don't do that. And so do we, if we're honest, So I just think nobody's better suited to parent your kids than you. And we have to remember it.
Yeah, and I think that that's very helpful to know, because a lot of times parents are so fearful that they're going to mess their kid up that they choose to do nothing. It's like, I don't want to say the wrong thing, or I don't want to do the wrong thing, so I'm going to say nothing, or I'm going to do nothing. But by parents saying nothing or doing nothing and kind of being a hands-off parent, they're actually doing more harm than if they were to say even the wrong thing. So I think we need to kind of, get a little bit of the stress off and say, even if we mess up as parents from time to time, first off, we've got the gospel. We can apply the gospel to ourselves, and we can teach the gospel even through that. And we can teach confession through that. We can confess in front of our kids that we've messed up. But we still need to be active in parenting. Not parenting is worse than parenting wrong sometimes, which sounds crazy, but I think that being an intentional, active parent is better even when you make mistakes, because even in those mistakes, you can show your kids how to admit mistakes.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Even those moments when you are failing in your own mind as a parent, you are teaching how to be humble and how to, communicate that everybody makes mistakes. That's a phrase that we use in our family at least once a week. Somebody says, everybody makes mistakes. And we just say, okay, and it's whether it's a dropped glass that shatters across the floor or tomato sauce that gets all across the carpet. Not saying any of these actually happen, right. Or whether we got really angry and should have controlled our temper better or whatever, so.
Well, okay. So that kind of leads to something else that I think is important to talk about. Okay. What if you are a parent who has a lot of insecurities and it's really difficult for you, maybe because of past situations or past burns, it's really difficult for you to admit mistakes. What do you think is a first step for that type of person, that type of parent? Or you're married to that type of person?
The first thing that comes to my mind is that we've lived hard lives, and, some of us have been sheltered and had plenty of provision and all that stuff, but we've still been hurt by many people. And we go around and we kind of act like we don't have all these wounds, but everybody's wounded. Just not everybody wants to talk about their wounds, and some people just don't want to open up and let people see those and know that they're hurt. And so, I think a person who is not willing to admit their wrongs, they have wounds in the past that have sharpened up, that aggressive side of them to protect that wound, and like they had strong defenses to protect themselves. So I think it just comes down to, like, if you're really going to accept the grace that God gives you, then you have to just know that this is the next step. Like, I've got to go and be bold and say, listen, I hate saying I was wrong and I'm sorry and you were right, but I'm trying to get there. So just be patient with me, but here I go, and that's going to make a giant, significant moment in your child's eyes when they see that, especially if you never do it, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that encouraging a spouse to do that, that's challenging, because you have to relate to that person, you know, constantly every day. And so, you know, I find myself sometimes making comments about something, you know, try to be encouraging through it, and sometimes I don't. And I just say, I understand that situation. And, you know, like, the closer you are to your spouse, the more you know your spouse, the more you know how far they might have to go in certain areas to get better, you know?
Yeah.
And you just got to be kind and nourishing in that process where you help them move towards that, you know? One of our friends, Shannon Hopkins, talks about how evangelism for him is not necessarily trying to get to the point of sharing like the life, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, but to help people get one step closer to Jesus, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that that's almost the same approach that I have, you know, with my spouse. Is I'm not trying to get her to be the perfect wife or mother or neighbor or whatever, teacher, whatever her roles are, right? I just want to come alongside and help her move to the next step. And that's part of what I promised her when I married her. It's what she does for me all the time. And, you know, that's what we're trying to do for our son as well. And so we're trying to help him move one step closer to spiritual maturity and a walk that's close with Jesus, that's obedient to him. So
I think, and that's a good point. You know, a lot of times we, as parents, look at our kids or even look at our spouse and say, man, they're so far from where they need to be, or where we think they need to be, that there's no point in even trying. But when we, you know, redefine what our job is, we just need to get them one step closer. Well, that's much more doable than getting them from here to here. We can just get them from here to here, right? And I think another thing that you mentioned, talking about the gospel, or the people who have a hard time admitting their faults, they, I don't think, fully understand the gospel story. If they have a hard time, and I know that I've done this before, you know, we all have pride, and it's during those times of pride where we don't want to admit a fault that we sometimes forget what the gospel story is all about. And sometimes just being reminded about what the gospel really is all about will help us to say, you know, okay, I can admit some fault here. So, okay, well, real quick, as we are getting close to wrapping up, we still have some time. Discipline. How do we discipline our kids while at the same time showing grace? Because you talked about, you know, you're kind of looking for the day when Mason does something super crazy, and you, instead of giving him what he deserves, you give him what he doesn't deserve, which is grace. You know, mercy is not getting what you do deserve, and grace is getting what you don't deserve. I've heard parents before their kids do something super crazy, and then instead of them being punished, they show them mercy, but also they take them out for ice cream. They give them something they don't even deserve, you know. But how do we discipline effectively without raising a bunch of spoiled kids who know how to work the system? That's the really slippery slope there. So do you have any wisdom for parents?
Thank you for having me on. I don't know that anybody has a really solid answer for that. If they did, I'd be a little suspect that, you know, they were confident in their answer. But like, the first, maybe and only thought that I have is that I think swift response is key to discipline, because like just yesterday, my son heard something, you know, like everything's online right now. We're in coronavirus, so online education, right? And so he's been watching these videos, and he heard a phrase in one of the videos that we would never say. And I heard him say it, and I said, nope, we don't say that. But, you know, it's like it's an instant thing, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's just, discipline is correction, right? It's as if there were many paths, and he slightly veers off onto one. I say, oh, no, come back over here, you know? And, you know, if you think about young children, when they're walking with you and they see something and they want to start going towards it, you know, you just grab them on the shoulder and bring them back closer to you as you walk. Now, I think that's the picture of discipline. It's just that there's a whole lot of expectations wrapped up in those moments when you expect that they would do something more honoring of God, or perhaps more honoring of you. I think that's a pitfall, that we attach our name to them, or we attach our parenting to them. And the truth is, their faith is their faith, and their obedience is their obedience. And we have a job to try to teach them, but it's up to them to go live it.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's many times that gets in the way. It affects what, us, and we stop disciplining in that moment for their sake, and we start disciplining for our sake, that we want them to better represent us.
Yeah.
So I'm guilty of that. Tell your neighbor that's walking past I said hello. Okay.
You have a lot of people walking.
Yeah.
It's coronavirus time.
That's
But
right.
yeah, I think that you're right. There's a couple of things that you said that made me think of some things that I've heard said before. Discipline is never for punishment's sake. It's always for correction or edification's sake, right? It's always about moving the person that you're trying to discipline one step closer to a better life or better quality, whatever it may be. So I think that's something that's important to keep in mind. And another thing that I've heard once before is, when you and I were growing up, we really needed our parents for information. When we were growing up, like I was always amazed at how much my parents knew, right? They didn't know any more than anybody else, but they knew so much more than I did. So I would always go to them as a kid and ask them a question, and they always had an answer for me, So when we grew up, we needed our parents for information, but our kids now are growing up in a day and age where they have information on their smartphones or their devices. And so they no longer need adults to get information. They need adults to interpret the information that they are given. And so we need to stop looking at ourselves as parents as being informers and start looking at ourselves as being interpreters of what they are being informed of. Just last night, we watched a Marvel movie, and I love the Marvel movies, but one of the things that was said is this theory of the multiverse, and this is apologetics type of stuff. But I stopped the movie and interpreted what the movie was trying to communicate with the multiverse to my kids, and tried to tell them the Christian view of what we believe about a so-called multiverse and all that. That's a completely different episode.
How did that go over?
Well, you know what? They were actually pretty interested in it because they love sci-fi stuff, and the multiverse is nothing more than just sci-fi wrapped up in what is called scientific, theory or whatever, but it's just sci-fi. So they really enjoyed the conversation, but at the same time, I stopped it, like you said, be instant, and so I was able to I really feel proud of myself for doing that. But that's the case. I think when you see them do something or say something or experience something that is not right, don't be mad at them, but immediately help them interpret what they're experiencing. And I think that goes a long way. Jason, is there anything else you'd like to say about that before we wrap up?
Thank you for asking. Yes. I was going to say, my mom passed when I was 18, and I, now that I'm like 40, almost 41, it's been a long time. There's very few memories, compared to back when I was quite a bit younger. But when I think about, did my mom love me? Did my mom try to raise me to honor the Lord? I remember those moments, after she became saved. I remember that was the heart of her, but I don't recall a single moment where she was, directing me or correcting me or disciplining me, pushing me into that space, And so I think that's similar to the same thing, like when you've had a pastor for 30 years or something, and you don't remember any of the sermons, but you're a changed person because you've sat in those sermons for 30 years or however long,
That's good.
I think that we have to remember that our role is a long-term care role, and that, today's discipline and today's correction will likely be not remembered. But the path that the child goes on and the relationship that we have with them and the relationship they have with Jesus is affected by each of those steps. I think it's a lot like, when you started a college class and it said you were going to basically have a midterm and a final, and you're like, I'm out on this one because you got 2 grades and there's no chance, right? But then the one who says every time you come in, there's going to be a quiz, and every week there'll be a paper, and whatever. those I'm like, yep, I got that one, because I know that I can keep my grade high enough, because there's many opportunities. And I think we have to remember we have many, many opportunities to shape our children. It's not a one and done kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like your one failure is just not a big deal, like move on, go apologize, let them know you're human, and then love on them. I'm so amazed at how I can make big mistakes, or what feels like big mistakes. And when I go to bed at night, my son comes and gives me a hug and a kiss and says, "I love you, Daddy." And it's like, well, I probably don't think I would have felt that way if I were in your place, because I did you wrong. But I just think it's a long-term journey, and we can't lose sight of that.
That is super important to remember, that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And, we always say what happens yearly is important, but what happens monthly is even more important. But what happens weekly is even more important. But what happens daily is what is most important. So maybe you had a bad day. Well, every day is a new day, and just correct yourself. When we admit our mistakes, we're able to actually correct our mistakes. Until we are able to admit our mistakes, we'll never fully be able to correct our mistakes, and we'll keep making the same mistakes over and over again. Good word, Jason. I really appreciate that. That is super encouraging for me. And for every listener out there, if you are having a bad day or you had a bad week, hey, it's not over. This is a marathon. This is a journey. And just correct your mistakes and keep moving forward, because it will work out. God has grace, and he will redeem even our mistakes as parents. And so I hope this has been a help to you, Jason. I really appreciate you being back on the show. We'll have to have you on the show again sometime. You bring so much insight every time you're on the show. If you are listening to this episode and you have enjoyed what you heard, I ask that you share this on social media, share this on your platforms, and let other people hear and learn from Jason and from the Fighting Families podcast. Until next time, may you go and fight for your family.
You have been listening to the Fighting Families podcast with Preston Cave. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes each week. If you like today's program, we want to encourage you to share it with your friends and family members. To learn more about the resources we have to offer, visit us at www.fightingfamilies.com. Until next time, be sure you fight for your family today.